let me introduce our speaker today. Francesco Sisci has had the rare privilege of interviewing the Pope recently at the Vatican. He has been the real expert on China-Vatican relations now for more than 20 years. I think everybody thinks of him as the person who really has followed this issue in greater depth than almost anybody else, certainly than anybody else in the media. He is from Italy, studied in Italy and then London, went to Beijing now nearly 30 years ago and has been there ever since and has followed the issues ever since. So it is a rare treat for us to have somebody as knowledgeable as Mr. Sisci, and I give you Mr. Sisci. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for Keith for this wonderful introduction, and thank you all for being here to listen to these very obscure things about the Vatican and China. Two very ancient traditions, one dating back 2,000 years, and the Vatican, but, rooted in the Roman and Greek tradition, so maybe 3,000 years, and so China, harking back to also 3,000 years in its imperial past, and both extremely unclear to all of us, including me. I'm not so sure I understand what I'm talking about. So I'll beg you for your patience and your generosity. And when I'm talking about this, will be what I think it is emerging is a new geopolitics of the Vatican, which is very weird. There are two ways to start this story. One is the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, it's 500-600 years ago, or another one is 25 years ago. Maybe if we first start with the 25 years ago, and then we go back to half a millennium ago. So 25 years ago was the end of the Cold War, and we pretty much all thought that America was the only superpower. It established the WTO and the new sets of rules for global trade. And after later, a few years later, it was challenged by the terrorists. And then it went to war in Afghanistan and Iraq. But 25 years later, what we have is that, of course, wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were a failure. And so was even more, indirect intervention in the Middle East, such as Syria or Libya. And WTO is also a failure, because now we know that America and the other countries are promoting free trade zones. That is, WTO is not working. So it would be a huge failure. In the past, these huge failures would have started the demise of a superpower. We know that in America in the late 60s, when the war in Vietnam was being lost, everybody was afraid of the domino effect, and Nixon had this wonderful, genius idea of reaching out to China to make up for the loss of Vietnam. So in fact, we lose Vietnam, but then we gain China, which is much more than Vietnam, and in fact, it turned out a good choice, because it helped a lot in hamming the Soviet threat and then eventually bring down. But a similar defeat by the Russians in Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s did bring down the Soviet empire. Here we have a situation in which international and economic policy of the United States have been failures for at least 15 years, and still America is the main superpower, the paramount superpower. No other country is able to replace it. Maybe challenge marginally, pushing, but no replacement is in sight. So there is a very strange situation. Not China, not Russia, not Europe. Europe doesn't exist, although I'm a European, I must say. There are different countries on the verge of disasters, but and America is the superpower, but is not a superpower able to decide it and to do it all by itself. In this situation, with an extraordinary pope, a new player in international policies is emerging. We know that President Obama thanked the Pope for his role in mending fences with Cuba and reestablishing relations with Cuba. The Pope also played a role in pushing Obama not to intervene in Syria 3 years ago. Now is when he threatened to intervene after the Russians used or helped the Syrians to use chemical weapons. They helped Europe and Russia on Ukraine, finding a common ground on Ukraine and trying to find a new peace solution for Ukraine, which is not definite, but is still, better than before. And apparently, the Vatican has also helped a dialogue between United States and Russia on the withdrawal of Russian troops from Syria, which has been significant and also very helpful for global peace. This Pope thinks, in fact, that his main goal as a Pope is not to convert as many people as he wanted, is not to become powerful and rich. In fact, we know that he is quite modest in his life. He thinks the church main task is to help the poor and to help global peace. And this is not something new for the church. In fact, the church has been playing these roles for centuries. During the Renaissance and before the Renaissance, we know that the Vatican helped play the role mediating situations between the different European states, the Italian independent countries, and also with the Christian, Byzantine state, the Muslim states in all the Mediterranean basin. So they were the inventors of the original balance of power. However, at that time, that role came with a baggage. The baggage was that they had a pontiff state. So on the one hand, they had the mission, they felt that they had the mission to mediate, to find a solution, political solution between different states. But on the other hand, they had to advance their own national interests, the interests of the pontiff states. Now, the Vatican doesn't have a pontiff state, doesn't have a vested interest in a way. It has only its religious mission. So in a way, they can bring back that experience, which died off slowly in the 16th century, since the 16th century, with the discovery of America, when the Turkish Empire conquered all other Muslim states, when the Christian world was becoming more concentrated in larger and more authoritative state nations. France, England, Germany was emerging, Austria was emerging. So they didn't feel they needed any longer the role of the Pope. And besides, the role of the Pope at the time was squeezed. North Europe was Protestants bitterly against the Pope. South and the Eastern Mediterranean was with the Muslims, so again, bitterly against the Pope. So the Pope was part of a huge controversy. And slowly and steadily, they became more and more insignificant. The role became significant again. The role of the Vatican became significant again with Pope Wojtyła. Of course, he was useful, instrumental, in fact, in bringing down the Soviet Empire, and in a peaceful way, without war, without much bloodshed. But then, still then, the Pope was one side of the fence. He was with the capitalist world against the other world. Now this Pope seems to be more in the middle. Of course, with very good relationship with Americans, with the Western world. After all, they are in the West, but reaching out to everybody else, to the other Christian faith, of course, to the Muslims, which, after all, they were recognized as late as the 13th century, still has a Christian heresy. Dante in his Inferno, I'm sure that we all remember, right? Put Mohammed as a Christian heretic in hell, but as a Christian heretic, not a different religion. And now, this is comes my little experience, also reaching out to China. And I would say, with this interview, I had the privilege and I think I had the miracle of accepting this interview, receiving this interview with him. And he was worried and concerned not only about the fate of 1.4 billion Chinese, but also about the fate of the, let's say, 5.5 billion non-Chinese who are worried about the rise of China. This, to me, and I think also to the Pope, if I'm not mistaken, is perhaps the biggest geopolitical challenge China and the world will face in the next decades. On the one hand, China is scared of a world where it is a minority, where rules don't come from their tradition, where they are a minority for the first time. And it is a Western world in which they don't understand. And of course, the rest of the world, which is largely Westernized. I mean, the Muslims were part of our history for 15 centuries, after all. And now, if we look back at this 15th century, this is one of the most peaceful times between Christianity and Muslims. We don't have an all-out war with the Muslims. China is the biggest challenge we faced, I think, since the fall of Rome by Alaric. It's something completely strange, completely new, which had been separated from our histories for over 2,000 years, and which we are confronting now for, say, less than 200 years, since the time of the Opium War, if we want to take a historical value. So this is a big problem. And when we have big problems, historically, the easiest way out for either party is to go to escalation of tension. And the Pope tries to avoid it, to avert it, and to prevent it. And this is the spirit of this interview, or what he said, not the interview, but what he said in the interview. And I think it is very important. He gave a lot of thought to it. Every word was considered and reconsidered. And it can be, hopefully will be, the new beginning of a new approach of the Church to China, and also of China of the Church, to the Church. Now, China has been very confused about the Church, about the Catholic Church. They don't really understand why Western people make such a fuss of the Pope, why, after all, is so important. And only, I would say, since very, very recently, this came to realization, okay, this guy is very important. This guy is the original super soft power, global super soft power. And they started realizing it just last year, a few months ago, in fact, when at the same time, Xi Jinping and Pope Francis were in America in the same days, and the visit of the Pope obscured for a few days even American political debate, let alone Xi Jinping. So they realized, okay, this guy is very important, but now how can we handle him? How can we cope with him? They still don't know. They are still not clear. But I would say, and this is news, the reception of this interview was very positive. Unlike President messages, other messages in the past of other popes, there have been dozens of articles in the Chinese press about this interview. There's been positive coverage. And this is maybe the beginning of a new approach. We shall see in the next months and years what will come of it. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's one of the most sweeping, historically informed introductory remarks we've had in a long time. That was a real pleasure to listen to. With regards to the Pope's remarks on the sweep of it, did he actually say that that the rise of China was the biggest challenge since the fall of Rome, or was that your?
No, this is mine. This is mine. Of course, no. The Pope wouldn't say such a thing. Otherwise, he wouldn't be the Pope, right?
No, it'd be a very just the way you phrased that particular remark. I was
no.
Okay.
Well, we journalists try to.
Well, that's why I try to be precise. The on a sort of a broader question, and it was something we talked about at the lunch table here, but I'm sure our audience will also be interested. So, how does all of this tie into China-Taiwan relations, particularly at a time when we are now, I guess, 7 weeks away from a presidential inauguration and change of administration in Taiwan?
As far as I know, we were talking about it. The Vatican would be ready to switch recognition with Taiwan anytime. The reality is that with China, between Taiwan and abandoning Taiwan and going back to or going to China, whatever it is. In fact, we know that the nunciatura, the embassy in Taiwan, has been downgraded for many, many years. The Catholics Church in Hong Kong, for instance, is under the Filipino nunciatura, the embassy, not under Taiwan. So all this means that the Vatican would be ready. In fact, at least since since Ma Ying-jeou became president of Taiwan, there's been a truce between Taiwan and China, between Taipei and Beijing, to be politically correct, on keeping Taiwan's present diplomatic allegiances, and Beijing doesn't want the Vatican to cut its ties with Taiwan. This is how things stand, and but if China were to change opinions, I don't think there would be a problem.
Has there been any discussion at the Vatican of putting the Hong Kong nunciature under a Beijing nunciature if that were to happen?
As far as I know, they are not discussing on establishing diplomatic relations. They don't, basically, neither side cares. They want to something else.
Okay. Florence?
Thank you. I'm Florence Deschangy, reporting for Le Monde. And I was an intern in Vatican in the late 80s, not as an apprentice nun, but as an apprentice journalist. So it's nice to hear about the Vatican again. I have two questions. You mentioned at the end of the speech the reception that this interview received in China. I'd be very interested to hear what more specifically was highlighted in the Chinese media. What did they like about it? What did they highlight? And then the second question is a bit different, more general. You seem to say that now the Pope clearly has a moral voice that no one else has in the world, surely not the heads of government. Is he aware of that, and can we expect to see his voice louder in the coming years, especially in issues like, wars, terrorism, inter-religion issues, and stuff like that? Thank you.
I will start with the second, which because it's the easier one. Of course, I'm not the Pope. I'm not even Catholic, let alone I'm not a priest. So I wouldn't presume to talk for the Pope. But my sense is that this Pope is very cautious, very determined, very cautious, but not given to loud proclamations. So I would be surprised if he had any. He was extremely vocal about anything major. He prefers to work. He prefers to do work. He's very active. He's very active. His diplomats are very active, talking to everybody, Iranians, Chinese, everybody. But they prefer to measure their words. He's a Jesuit. He knows how to work. He worked with revolutionaries in Argentina and the dictators. He had to find a way between these two and to save his priests who were going in. So I would expect practical work, not vocal proclamations. As for the second thing, I think at the first actually, the reaction. The reaction is very interesting. I believe, because it also been evolving. At first, there was a wave of articles all over the press. All major newspapers reported, Xinhua, People's Daily, everybody reported it. Big titles, big headlines, short articles. It's mainly few sentences picked up from the interview, highlighting the positive message, the admiration for the Chinese culture, the admiration for the Chinese civilization, the positive, the words of hope the Pope gave about one-child policy, all the sufferings that the Chinese people had in the past decades. And that was it. But at the beginning, also some remarked the distance between the two sides were still quite big. And then a few weeks later came a longer article on Global Times. This time there was an interview they put in an interview to the former Cardinal of Washington, McCarrick, and they interviewed me. And then they didn't say anything about the distance. They didn't say anything about what was the differences. They highlighted the positive message. And also, they asked me, what happens if the Pope comes to China? And I said, well, it would be in Chinese best interest to invite the Pope to China. And I thought, they would cut it out. In fact, they left it in. So to me, this means that they are thinking about it, thinking about the possibility of inviting the Pope to China. Will this actually happen? I don't know. When would that happen? In any case, don't know. But at least now there is a difference. There is a possibility. I would say a month ago there was not even a possibility of that.
Just a couple quick questions, and I'll throw it open to the floor if you can start thinking of your questions. But one, just as almost a structural question, did the Vatican handle this? Did they regard this? Were they giving the interview to you as a scholar at Renmin University, or was this explicitly done as a press interview? I think you're a freelancer for Asia Sentinel. How structurally? Because I'm curious because it's also
relevant. This is a very good question. This is the key question. Good for you. Good of you to ask it. Very good question. Nobody has asked it before. No, they gave me the interview as a Renmin professor at the Renmin University in China. You're right.
Oh, okay, so you were writing about it as an academic. So from their point, does the fact that they structured it as speaking to a prominent Italian scholar at a Chinese university,
exactly,
do you regard that as that was part of their outreach to China?
Yes.
Okay, and then also as a follow-up question, how do you think the Pope's exposure to liberation theology and his greater tolerance perhaps for it, as well as his willingness to promote the cause of the martyred late leader of the El Salvadorian church, make him perhaps a more acceptable interlocutor for the Chinese government than his predecessors?
Actually, I thought that could play, but talking to the Chinese, they really don't know the liberation theology. They, most Chinese never heard of it. Only people who are specialized in Catholic history know about the liberation theology, and they think it's very odd. So I don't think it plays in any way. But what it plays is that he, since the beginning and ever, he has never been, how can I put it, obviously anti-communist. He said times and again, I'm not communist, but I had good friends who were communists. I'm not Marxist, but I had good friends who were Marxist. He's very open. And this kind of openness, of course, it helped them. It helps. It is helping him.
Okay. We had a question down here, I believe.
Just quickly, you said that you don't think that China and the Vatican are seeking a resumption of diplomatic ties, but something else. Could you go into what are they looking for? Is it the Vietnam model for naming police?
What I could tell you is guesswork, and then honestly, it wouldn't be fair to say.
Okay, why don't I go with my second question? The second question was, this Pope is really shaking things up within the Vatican, not only globally, but within the Vatican itself. He's really been pushing for reform. He's the first non-European Pope in I don't know how many centuries, but what, from your perspective and what you know, what has been the internal reaction to Pope Francis within the Vatican? Is he meeting a lot of resistance?
Yes, of course, we know he's meeting a lot of resistance because he's shaking things up. But a friend just a couple of days ago told me about the latest scandal that surfaced on the Italian press about every now and then, almost every other day, there is a leak about what something absurd the Vatican did or Pope did, the Vatileaks we know. Now, what is interesting, this Vaticanist friend pointed is, let's quote him because he's very good, is Carlo Marroni. He works for Sole 24 Ore. He said, you see, when Ratzinger was here, Ratzinger was the Pope, there were Vatileaks. In fact, there were not as many as now, but every leak, every news coverage exploded in the international press and seemed to overwhelm the Pope and overwhelm the debate. Now, this Pope is so strong that there are leaks almost, maybe not daily basis, but certainly every other week there is a new leak. He has a brain tumor, or he's unable to walk, or he talked to some secret agent in Canada, or whatever, And they vanish into thin air. After a few hours, nobody pays attention. This Pope is extremely strong, and he's able, maybe by some holy force, I don't know, to impose his will. So I see that the opposition, which is strong, is stubborn, but is also de facto weakening because his reach is huge. And he's changing the position of the church in the world. And this is the first time in 400 or 500 years.
Okay. We have another question over there, and then we'll go over here next.
Thanks. Ben Bland from the Financial Times. We've recently seen Mark Zuckerberg in Beijing prostrating himself in front of the Communist Party in a bid to get access to the Chinese market. How far do you think the Vatican is willing to compromise to get access to 1.4 billion potential worshippers
again, as I said, this Pope is not interested in increasing his flock of worshippers. His interest is in peace. So this is his main task. He doesn't want to convert the Chinese. He doesn't want, this is not his first purpose. This is not his first. You see, the Jesuit, there was a, let me go on sweeping history again. There was a big difference between Jesuits, the approach of Jesuits, and the approach of Franciscans and Dominicans with China since the 16th century, late 16th century, 17th century. Franciscans and Dominicans were insisting we should convert people, and they were counting their success on the numbers of people converted. Jesuits didn't convert anybody. They did their work, and if somebody wanted to convert, that's their business. They are not into converting people. And in fact, the controversy was so tough that in the end, the Franciscans and Dominicans managed to push the Jesuits out of China, right? Because they thought, you know, what are you doing there? You're helping the Chinese emperor. This is not your work. But they had a different approach. Their approach, which is the same, I would say, in spirit of this Pope, is to help peace, is to help understanding between China and the rest of the world. This is his first task. And then for this, I think this Pope is willing to do anything, to humiliate himself as much as he does. I mean, we saw pictures of him washing the feet of Muslim women, which is the lowest ranking of. Why? For peace. So his bigger task, the issue is not humiliation, the task is peace. If he can manage to get peace, he will do something for peace, not for converting people, not to gain access to Chinese internet or anything else. That's humiliation. It's not humiliation at all, because this is realization of his faith. His faith tells him we should do this. This is exactly the opposite, I would say.
If I could just follow up quickly, doesn't he have a responsibility to ensure that Catholics in China have access to sort of the true version of Catholicism? Isn't that part of his responsibility beyond world peace, to actually service his flock?
Right. But, I mean, is doing anything damaging to them? I don't think so. I don't think he's damaging them. In fact, if you read all reactions from all underground priests and bishops, the bishops and priests not recognized by the official, church in China, all are positive. On Vatican Insider, which is an online website with La Stampa Repubblica, Gianni Valente, a journalist, conducted more than a dozen interviews with priests and bishops, underground, not recognized, all in favor of Pope warming up to China. So I don't see anything damaging in what he does to the Catholic, but he's reaching out to the 7 billion people who directly or indirectly are very worried and concerned about the China rise. This is even a bigger issue, I think.
I'm a reporter from a publication called MLEX.
Okay.
How do you think the Pope and the Catholic Church will allay the Chinese leaders' fear of, having an alternative power center? Because, I mean, for centuries, Europe had this issue of the Pope having great political influence on various Catholic kings and countries, whether it's in the Middle Ages or with Henry VIII or Louis XIV or Napoleon Bonaparte. But the Chinese leaders can't get used to that idea. How does the Catholic Church reassure the Chinese leaders the Pope is not an alternative power center that's a threat? How do they prevent them from demonizing the Pope like the Dalai Lama?
Okay, the Dalai Lama is a different issue. Let's not confuse it for a moment. orange and apples, they are telling us in the first grade mathematical lessons are not to be confused. If we confuse them, we get nowhere. And I would say political. The Pope, especially this Pope, especially this Vatican, doesn't have a political agenda. In the interview, he refused to speak about politics. The Pope doesn't have a political agenda. It has a peace agenda and a religious agenda. So in theory, but theories are important, as we know, there is no clash between the Church and the Communist Party. In fact, in the 17th Party Congress, there is a whole paragraph of the 2007, no, not 17, 16, the 207 Party Congress. There was a whole paragraph of the speech delivered by Party Secretary Hu Jintao, who said that the role of religious figures is positive for the promotion of the harmonious society. So in theory, you see, the party speaks of religious figures but doesn't speak of religions because the party is not interested in religion as religion. And the Pope says, I have no interest in politics. So in theory, there is room for coming together. Now, of course, we know that the Pope has been clashing with secular powers for centuries. I think only a few decades ago, the United States signed an agreement with the Vatican about the appointment of bishops, the role of dioceses, and for many, many years, Catholics were called papists. The words that the people who would take the voice of the Pope and conditioning our own lives. The Vatican is very cumbersome and very big reality, and every single state has difficulties in handling the Pope. In France, there is a formal agreement in which bishops cannot be appointed without a written approval of the civil, both local and central authorities. So you have all kinds of different agreements in different countries. So in theory, having solved the theoretical issue, there could be a solution also of the practical issue. And as far as I know, the distance between the two is very near.
Okay, we have time for one more question over here, please. From the press gallery here.
Mr. Sisci, I'm Kathy Wong, reporter from the South China Morning Post. You mentioned new geopolitics and also the new approach of Vatican towards China. Did the Pope actually talk about this new approach in his interview? And also in your published article, the Pope didn't quite touch upon the conflicts with China, such as the appointments of bishops in China and the removal of crosses in different churches in China. Did the Pope actually talk about this, and how did he describe the current relations between Vatican and China? Thank you.
No, he didn't talk about any of this, also because I don't know, and I'm not part of the negotiation, and it would be foolish, I think, of him to talk to me about ongoing negotiation. No Pope has done that, not talking about diplomatic developments to the press. They never did it, and I'm sure they will never do it. And new geopolitics, no, this is my way of saying, but after that, after I use this wording, I talked to the Vatican, and they didn't, they didn't sanction this wording. I don't know if it's good enough for you.
Okay, one more question over here, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you very much. I'm Claudia from the Austrian Consulate General. I was reading that there was a Chinese delegation visiting Rome in January. Do you know more what was discussed and the outcome of these meetings?
As I said, I'm not part of the diplomatic discussions. I think it was a good sign and that they went there and they had discussed something, and I think is also conducive. But what is it? I really don't know. I know that the difference between the two parties is small. It's very small. However, let me put it this way. So far, the distance between the two parties has been very small for several years. It's not just now. The problem is, as far as I know, I may be completely wrong on that, is that until recently, Beijing didn't feel they had a big incentive in improving relations with the Vatican. Because after all, Catholic people in China are a tiny minority. They are not troublemakers. Catholic Church is big, but that doesn't give us troubles anywhere. We have so many other pressing issues to tackle, the currency, the neighbors, the One Belt, One Road. I mean, you name it. We have so many things. And so the Catholic Church, which is long-term and doesn't give us any trouble, so why handling now? Perhaps this interview played a role, played something, into tickle somehow the Chinese mind, saying, okay, this guy is actually a super soft power. Maybe we have to take him more seriously and we have to give it more time. Having said that, there is still no sense of urgency. So we shall see.
Thank you very much, Francesco, for those remarks.
Thank you for having me.
We like to give all of our guests something to remember the club by.